Welcome back. This is part 2 of chapter 18 of our business law text. The title of the chapter is Performance and Discharge. As you may recall, in segment 1, we talked about how the contract can be finished when the parties have performed their various duties, and their duties are then discharged. They can move on. Some contracts, however, have a situation in which there are certain conditions and strings attached to the agreement, maybe a condition precedent or a condition subsequent, that if the condition is not met, it could result in the duties of the parties being discharged. We covered that, and by the way, on page 324 of the text, there's a nice little chart that summarizes those conditions precedent, conditions subsequent, and concurrent conditions. You may want to take a look at that. This segment is going to be devoted to how the duties of the parties can be discharged by performance of the contract. The parties do what they're actually supposed to do in the agreement, discharged by the actual performance. So let's go to that slide. There it is, discharged by performance. Now, first off, when the parties are going to perform the contract, they step forward and they say, "Okay, I'm going to do it. Here's my duties, and here's what I'm going to be doing. I'm tendering performance to you." Going back to the whole example with the Corvette, the person presents their $10,000. They're tendering their performance. The other person presents the keys and the pink slip. They're tendering their performance as well. It's an unconditional offer to perform to the other person. And if both parties do that, they tender their performance. Performance is done. Performance is complete, and all the duties of the parties are discharged now, since they have performed per the contract. Discharged by performance. Well, that's all good and well. You have a lot of contracts in which both parties completely perform the way they should, and the contract duties are discharged. That's when you have complete performance, when both parties perform exactly as agreed. But what happens? What happens when you have situations involving less than complete performance? What do you do then? What if I have contracted with someone to build their house for them, and there's a whole huge list of things for me to do in the building of that house? And I do, here's the standard, it's up here, everything that I'm supposed to do, and I do almost everything, and I come so very, very close to doing everything, but I fall just a weensy bit short. What do we do then? What do we do in that situation? Well, that's a situation in which, if it fails to be complete performance and just falls shy of that, the courts refer to that as being substantial performance. That's when a party in good faith performs substantially all the terms of the contract. And there's 3 parts to it. They perform in good faith. Their performance does not vary greatly from the actual performance that was required. And the performance creates substantially the same benefits that the person was provided with had the other person had a complete performance been provided. I got stuck there for a second. And the courts decide on a case-by-case basis on whether or not there has been substantial performance in the contract, whether it falls just short, or whether it falls in the category of a breach. So the courts take it on a case-by-case basis. So what happens if we have a situation in which there was substantial performance? Well, the other party is then required to still perform under the contract. That is to say, if I built the house and I substantially perform, I fall just a little bit short, the other party still has to pay me the whole amount of the contract. But then they can go to court and sue me for what they are entitled to, some type of remedy, because of my substantial performance and failure to do complete performance. In a situation like that, you have to ask yourself, well, what does that person get? What are the measure of damages? Well, there's one of 2 ways of measuring it. One is to bring the object of the contract into compliance with the terms. If that cost is reasonable, to bring it from here to here and do complete performance, then that's my remedy. That's the person's remedy to get complete performance. If that's not reasonable, then the other potential remedy is the difference in value between the performance rendered and the performance that would have been rendered if the contract had been performed completely. The difference financially between here and here. Okay, there's a great case that speaks to that. It's on page 326 of your text, Jacob versus Ernst & Young versus Kent. Jacob versus Youngs and Kent, rather. Great case. There was a case that went before the Court of Appeals in New York, before Judge Cardozo, Benjamin Cardozo eventually became a Supreme Court judge in the United States. A person builds a house, or is contracts to build a house. And the person who is having the house built for them specifically indicated they wanted a particular kind of pipe installed in the plumbing. I mean, went as far as naming it specifically, this is the kind of pipe I want. Well, the builder, when they built the house, I don't know if that pipe wasn't available, but they found, the builder found a different type of pipe that, pound for pound, for all intents and purposes, was the same quality of that other pipe that was listed in the contract. So they start to build it, and the person who was having the house built for them found out and said, "Wait a second, you didn't build it exactly the way I wanted to." So they go to court, and the person who was having the house built wanted the entire house torn up, have the old pipe pulled out, and the correct pipe put in. And Judge Cardozo, in his infinite wisdom, said, that's not really a practical solution. That is not reasonable. And your remedy is, in this case, since we can't tear down the house and put in the pipe you want, is the remedy is the difference in value between the substantial performance and the complete performance. What's the dollar value between the two? And because of the fact that there was virtually little to no difference in the two types of pipe, the person who was having the house built didn't get very much in the way of a recovery on that case. But that gives you the example of the two types of remedies that are available to the person who is taking the other party to court when they've only done substantial performance and not complete performance. Well, what other types of performances are there? Well, there's performance to the satisfaction of another. What does that mean? Well, it might be the performance to the satisfaction of me. If the contract is for personal duties in nature, or say somebody's painting a portrait of me, all right, and it has to be painted, the performance has to be done to my satisfaction. If I look at the painting afterwards, I go, well, it's a great looking painting. It looks a lot like Brad Pitt. But it doesn't look like me. Maybe you want to give that painting to Brad Pitt. It's not satisfactory to me, so it has to be done to my satisfaction. It falls short, so no, it doesn't qualify. You don't get it. You haven't met the standard to my satisfaction. Sometimes, if a person is not mentioned and it's not for personal services like a painting, they'll use the reasonable person standard. What would a reasonable person view as being satisfactory in the performance of the act for the contract? And sometimes the courts go, well, wait a second. If it's not just a reasonable person, if some expertise is required here, maybe we should have somebody designated in the contract, or maybe we should designate an expert to take a look at it. And sometimes contracts designate the third person as being not just a reasonable person, but a specific expert who will inspect the work and make sure it is up to snuff. So you have performance to the satisfaction of another person, whether it's me, the reasonable person, or a designated third person. So you've got performance in a contract, and you can go all the way to the very top and do exactly as required, or you can go substantial performance and fall just a little bit short. Anything below that, in the eyes of the court, is usually viewed as a material breach of the contract. And in a situation like that, the other party is not required to perform. That is to say, if I breach the contract and don't do what I'm supposed to do, and it's a material breach, the other party doesn't have to pay me. They aren't required to do so. Compare that with substantial performance. If I substantially perform, the other party has to pay, but they can still take me to court and get some type of remedy, hopefully, whether it's the first or second type that we talked about with regard to that house case, at building the house. So, material breach. If the material breach is considered in the eyes of everybody to be a minor breach, something that can be fixed, a quick fix, they'll the courts will suspend the contract and say, okay, fix this and get this back on track, breacher, and take care of this, and hopefully this contract can be saved. And sometimes that can happen. They can cure the breach and go ahead with the contract and have it going along and have it finish up. The underlying policy is that we want contracts to succeed, say the courts. We want to make sure that they work, and if it takes to push the pause, you have to push the pause button to make this work and cure the breach, why, we'll let you do that. Sometimes there's going to be a situation in which you have what's known as anticipatory repudiation. That is to say, you sign a contract with somebody and 5 minutes later they call you up and they say, I've decided I'm not going to perform under this contract. I'm just giving you the heads up on this. In a situation like that, people are surprised by this, but you can sue that person. You say, well, they haven't even done anything yet. Well, what they have done is told you they intend to breach that contract. And the courts say you shouldn't be required to just sit around on your hands and do nothing while this person doesn't do what they're supposed to do in the contract. No, you can take them to court, and a lot of times that is used as leverage to get the person off their keister and to go ahead and perform the contract as they're supposed to do. Because a repudiation like that, in which they say, I'm not going to perform the contract, this anticipatory breach of the contract and repudiation, that's viewed as a material breach of the contract. And they should be, they need to be held accountable. You put their feet to the fire, you take them to court, and you say, okay, I'll sue you for damages, or you can get back on track and do what you're supposed to do. The last area that we talk about here in this segment is the time for performance. And in the eyes of the court, unless the agreement specifically states that, the contract is to be performed in a reasonable time. And that varies from case to case. Sometimes the contract says that time is of the essence. And in a situation like that, if time is of the essence, it has to be done quickly. And if it's not done quickly by the party that's required to perform what they're supposed to do, that could be viewed as a material breach. So time could be of the essence. This stuff about complete performance, substantial performance, and material breach is all summed up very well on page 329 of the text in a chart. It's a good study tool. We're at 13 minutes. I better quit now because you're probably starting to drone off and fall asleep. So we'll go off and we'll pick up next time with discharge of the obligations of your by agreement and discharge by operation of law. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you in another segment.